Hey, Silent Pages fam. We're starting a new love journey. Tell us where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe. Now stay with us. The story begins. The wind off the Atlantic battered the cliffs with relentless insistence, carrying a chill that cut straight through Allison's coat. She gripped the leather strap of her satchel a little tighter as the gravel crunched beneath her boots, each step echoing against the cliffs like a tentative drumbeat of warning. Blackwood Mansion rose before her, an imposing silhouette against the dim gray sky, its stone walls darkened and weather-beaten by decades of storms and salt-laden air. Even from a distance, the estate seemed to breathe, slowly, deliberately, as though aware of her presence. Allison had prepared for this visit meticulously. She had pored over inventories, historical records, and restoration reports, memorized floor plans, and familiarized herself with the mansion's past owners. Her career had been defined by her ability to restore objects of immense value and preserve the stories they carried, but she had never encountered a place that seemed alive in the way Blackwood did. There was a weight to the mansion, a quiet sorrow that hung in the air like a fog, pressing down on her shoulders and whispering of secrets best left undisturbed. She approached the front doors, her gloves brushing against the carved oak. The wood was rough and cold, and when she pressed the brass handle, the door groaned in protest. It opened to reveal a grand hall layered with shadow and dust. High ceilings and dark wood paneling gave the space an almost cathedral-like solemnity. Portraits of stern ancestors lined the walls, their painted eyes catching the faint light and following her movements with an uncanny awareness. A chill ran down her spine, not entirely from the sea wind, but from the house itself. She paused, taking a deep breath, trying to ground herself. "You must be Allison." The voice was sudden, low, and measured. Allison spun, her hand instinctively gripping the strap of her satchel. Emerging from the shadows of the archway leading to the mansion's archive was a man, tall, lean, with precise movements that gave him an air of controlled authority. His eyes, dark and piercing, studied her intently, assessing and judging with an efficiency that made her stomach tighten. Yes, that's me," she said, extending a hand, though she noticed he did not move to shake it. "I'm here to." He raised a hand, cutting her off with a calm authority that brooked no interruption. "Save your breath," he said. "I know why you're here. You'll find the house is not as welcoming as you expect. Your senses might deceive you. Fatigue, shadows, drafts. Don't give these things more credit than they deserve." Allison's pulse quickened. She had anticipated skepticism. She had dealt with academics and historians who valued logic over intuition, but there was something in his demeanor that went beyond professional caution. He seemed almost defensive, as if the house had already impressed upon him its judgments. "I'm not here to be convinced," she replied evenly, though her fingers tightened on her satchel. "I'm here to restore what's valuable and to document everything I can. I've dealt with unusual properties before. I can handle it." Caleb's lips curved ever so slightly, though it was not a smile. It was a subtle acknowledgement of her confidence. "Experience doesn't prevent the mind from fabricating ghosts in an empty hallway," he said. "We'll see if your imagination survives the first night here." Allison noted the faint smudge of ink on his sleeve, the meticulous arrangement of papers on the nearby desk, and the slight dust that clung to his boots. He was competent, undeniably, yet rigid, skeptical, and unyielding. She realized that any collaboration between them would be difficult, possibly combative, before trust could ever form. A cold draft swept through the hall as she adjusted her coat. The mansion creaked in response, a subtle, eerie chorus of groaning wood and shifting stone. Allison shivered. It wasn't just the wind. The house seemed to exhale, as though acknowledging her presence and assessing her purpose. "Follow me," Caleb said, stepping aside with a precise movement. "The archive is where you'll begin. If you want to see what's valuable, start there. Try not to let your nerves convince you that everything that moves is alive." Allison's eyes swept the room one last time. Dust motes hung like tiny specters in the shafts of light. The portrait's eyes seemed sharper than before, and the house itself felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for her next move. She squared her shoulders, inhaled, and stepped into the archive, the scent of old parchment and wood polish filling her senses. As she entered, she felt it again, a faint, sorrowful presence, a chill that was more than the wind. Her instincts told her that the mansion had stories that no ledger or artifact could fully convey. She glanced at Caleb. He was already busy with his documents, indifferent to the faint tremor in her hands. A small smile played at the corner of her lips. Perhaps skepticism and intuition could coexist, she thought. Perhaps together, they could uncover what lay hidden in Blackwood Mansion's walls. The first step had been taken. The mansion had welcomed her, but on its own terms. And Allison understood, with an almost physical certainty, that nothing about Blackwood would be simple. The first night at Blackwood Mansion settled over Allison like a velvet shroud, thick and suffocating. The ocean wind had softened to a mournful whisper, carrying with it the distant crash of waves against the cliffs below. Allison moved cautiously through the dimly lit corridors, her lantern casting long, flickering shadows that seemed to stretch and twist with every step. Each floorboard groaned under her weight, a low, resonant creak that made her heart jump despite her resolve. She had expected the mansion to be quiet, but not in the way that unsettled the soul. The first anomaly came quietly. The heavy door to the west wing, one she was certain she had closed, clicked shut behind her without a sound. She froze, her breath caught mid-inhale. A current of cold air swept along the hallway, carrying a faint scent of aged paper and something sweeter, almost floral, lingering beneath the decay. Allison's instinct whispered one word, ghost. She shook her head, dismissing it as imagination, though her hand remained on the doorknob, ready to ward off whatever unseen force might emerge. Moments later, a soft, plaintive sound drifted down from the upper floors. It was faint at first, a whisper of air perhaps, or so she told herself, but it slowly coalesced into the unmistakable wail of a woman crying. Allison's pulse quickened. Her steps faltered as she followed the sound, up the main staircase whose banister had been worn smooth by decades of hands. The hallway stretched before her, lined with faded wallpaper and the occasional tarnished frame, each shadow a potential threat, each whisper a promise of secrets buried deep within these walls. Caleb's voice cut through the tension from the archive below. "Allison," he called, flat and measured. "Are you still wandering the corridors chasing shadows?" She turned sharply, startled by the intrusion. "Caleb, did you hear that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "The crying, it's coming from upstairs. I think. No, I know, there's something here. Crying." His tone was skeptical, dismissive. "Old houses make noises. Settling wood drafts. You've been traveling all day. Perhaps exhaustion is amplifying your senses." Allison clenched her jaw, unwilling to let his skepticism diminish what she had just heard. "I've been in old houses before, Caleb. I know what normal sounds are. This isn't normal. There's someone, or something, upstairs." There was a long pause. Then the faint shuffling of papers, the scratch of pen on parchment. Caleb emerged from the shadows of the archive, holding a bundle of brittle documents, his brow furrowed. "All right," he said cautiously. "Perhaps you're right to be alert, but let's approach this logically." He spread the papers across a large oak table, careful to keep them intact. "I've been going through these estate records, wills, and property ledgers," he explained. "There's mention here, tragically, of a young woman named Elizabeth who died in the 1970s. She was connected to the family's inheritance. According to the records, her death was sudden, suspiciously timed, but officially ruled accidental. There are notes here about her attempts to contest some of the estate decisions before her untimely passing." Allison leaned closer, her fingers grazing the edges of the documents, feeling the weight of history in her hands. "So, the house isn't haunted?" she asked softly, almost hoping for confirmation, yet unwilling to deny what she had just experienced. Caleb shook his head, his expression a mixture of focus and mild exasperation. "Not necessarily. These noises, doors closing, objects shifting, even the crying, could all be explained by the mansion itself. Old structures have ways of moving, of amplifying sound. The crying could be some sort of mechanical echo from old communication devices, or even the result of a damaged phonograph from decades past. The mansion retains traces of the past, not spirits, but events and actions, frozen in the architecture and the objects within it." Allison exhaled slowly, trying to reconcile her intuition with his logic. There was an uncomfortable truth in what he said. She had felt the mansion's sorrow, yes, but perhaps the source was more tangible, more human than spectral. Yet, even as she tried to rationalize the sounds, her gut prickled with the certainty that Elizabeth's story was not entirely finished. Caleb continued, his eyes scanning the documents with methodical precision. "These records suggest that Elizabeth's death, and the subsequent handling of her estate, left behind unresolved conflicts and irregularities. If someone had tampered with the documents or attempted to suppress them, it could explain why certain anomalies persist in the mansion's operation. This house holds more than just walls and furniture. It holds secrets, and they don't always announce themselves politely." Allison nodded, her thoughts racing. "Then it's not a ghost we're dealing with. It's a story waiting to be uncovered. And the mansion, it's our guide." Caleb's lips twitched into something approaching acknowledgement, though his skepticism remained intact. "Perhaps," he said, but we'll need careful documentation, observation, and patience. This is not a place where conclusions should be drawn hastily. As the first night deepened into pre-dawn silence, Allison and Caleb worked side by side, one guided by intuition, the other by evidence. The house whispered its history around them, doors shifting in the hallways, the faint cry from above, drafts that seemed almost sentient. Each anomaly pulled them closer to the mansion's truth, forcing them to navigate both the tension of unexplained events and the friction between instinct and reason. By the time Allison finally allowed herself a short rest, she understood one thing clearly. Blackwood Mansion was not merely a structure of stone and wood. It was a living archive of grief, deception, and memory. And she, alongside Caleb, skeptical, precise, and stubbornly analytical, was now bound to uncover its story, one hidden document at a time. The first full day at Blackwood Mansion unfolded like a slow-moving tide, each hour revealing new shadows and whispers. Allison had quickly realized that being alone in the sprawling estate was not an option. Even during daylight, the corridors seemed to stretch endlessly, and every corner hid the possibility of a sudden, unnerving sound. The mansion pressed in from all sides, its presence overwhelming, as though it disapproved of solitary intruders. Caleb, noticing her unease, suggested they share the workspace. "It's more efficient this way," he said, his voice clipped but not unkind. "And safer. This mansion has a way of isolating people. Two sets of eyes, two sets of instincts. Perhaps we'll catch more than if either of us worked alone." Allison hesitated, glancing around the dusty, high-ceilinged archive. She was used to solitary work, to trusting her instincts entirely, but there was an undeniable sense of security in Caleb's pragmatic approach. Reluctantly, she agreed. They set up their workstations across the room from each other. Her meticulous note-taking and artifact cleaning contrasted sharply with his piles of documents, maps, and ledgers arranged with geometric precision. Almost immediately, their methods clashed. Allison moved slowly, carefully handling each item, cataloging every detail, while Caleb jotted notes in margins, cross-referencing dates and names with a speed and decisiveness she found unnerving. "You're moving too fast," she admonished gently when he lifted a fragile letter without gloves. "You'll damage it." "I'm not damaging anything," Caleb replied, his tone firm but neutral. "Hesitation slows discovery. We have a schedule, Allison. Prioritize efficiency alongside caution." She rolled her eyes, muttering about the difference between preservation and productivity, while he responded with a faint smirk, barely acknowledging her words. Yet, despite the friction, an unspoken rhythm began to form between them, mutual respect underlying the tension. Later, during a brief pause, Allison wandered toward the grand piano tucked into the corner of the archive room, its keys yellowed and dust-laden. The soft sunlight from the tall windows fell on the instrument, highlighting the intricate carvings along its frame. To her surprise, Caleb was already seated at the bench, fingers poised above the keys. Without looking up, he began to play. A song from the 1970s, gentle yet melancholic, a tune that seemed to echo the mansion's own sorrow. Allison froze, the music cutting through the residual tension between them. There was something human in the sound, something grounding amidst the mansion's oppressive presence. She listened quietly, feeling a strange mixture of comfort and unease. Caleb's focus was absolute, his posture impeccable, yet the music softened the rigid edges of his persona. For a brief moment, he was not the skeptical archivist, but simply a man playing an old melody in a house heavy with memories. Their shared tasks continued, the piano fading into the background. At one point, Allison struggled with a massive, antique wardrobe. Its weight was daunting, the wood swollen with age, and the brass handles resisted every pull. Caleb appeared silently, wordless, and together they heaved the piece aside. A hollow thud against the wall echoed beneath their efforts, drawing their attention. Allison knelt, brushing away years of dust and debris, and gasped softly. Embedded in the wall was a small, rectangular indentation, almost like a hidden compartment. Carefully, she cleared the area to reveal the edge of a steel door, partially concealed by the warped floorboards and crumbling plaster. Caleb crouched beside her, curiosity flickering across his face for the first time that day. "A safe," he murmured, his tone betraying a hint of excitement. "This wasn't in any inventory I've seen." Together, they examined the mechanism. The safe was old, but remarkably sturdy, and its keyhole glinted beneath the layer of dust. Allison's hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but anticipation. "Do you think this belonged to Elizabeth?" she asked quietly, the weight of the past pressing down on them. Caleb ran a careful finger along the edge, studying the craftsmanship. Possibly, he said, or perhaps someone else from that era. Whoever it was, they went to great lengths to hide it. And judging by the placement, it was meant to remain undiscovered. Until now, for the first time, the mansion felt almost alive, not as a menacing presence, but as a keeper of secrets, nudging them forward, challenging them to uncover its hidden truths. Allison and Caleb exchanged a look, the friction of earlier disagreements momentarily forgotten. Here, amidst dust, music, and mystery, a partnership, tentative and fragile, was beginning to take root. They would open the safe. They would uncover the past. And in doing so, they would step deeper into the mansion's shadows, where intuition and logic would have to meet if they were to survive and understand. The legacy waiting within Blackwood Mansion. Dust swirled in the slanted afternoon light as Allison and Caleb knelt before the hidden safe. The air between them carried a strange tension, a mixture of anticipation, curiosity, and something that neither dared to name aloud. The safe's metal surface was cold and unyielding, its keyhole obscured by decades of neglect. Allison's fingers traced the edges delicately, feeling every groove, every imperfection, as though the safe itself were testing her patience. Caleb leaned in close, his shoulder brushing hers. "You're too gentle," he remarked softly, a note of amusement in his usually stern voice. "You need more confidence. Sometimes history doesn't respond to hesitation." Allison shot him a side glance, lips twitching at the corner, caught between exasperation and the flutter of something unexpected. "And sometimes haste destroys the evidence," she countered. Their eyes met for a brief moment, a subtle spark flaring in the dim light, only to vanish as quickly as it appeared. They worked together, Allison guiding the delicate manipulations of the lock, while Caleb applied steady, calculated pressure. Minutes stretched into an eternity, punctuated by the faint click of mechanisms moving after decades of stillness. Finally, with a soft, metallic sigh, the safe door creaked open, revealing its hidden contents. Inside lay a small, ornate key resting atop a leather-bound notebook. The key gleamed faintly, the metal worn smooth by countless hands, while the notebook's cover was mottled with age and moisture stains. Allison's breath caught. The key, it's old. Could it belong to another secret compartment? Maybe a hidden room? Caleb's dark eyes scanned the notebook. Possibly, he murmured, running a careful finger along the spine. And this looks like Elizabeth's handwriting. He gently lifted the notebook, revealing the first page. The letters were precise, yet flowing, notes penned in ink now faded to brown. The content was cryptic, filled with numbers, names, and symbols that suggested more than mere personal reflections. Allison leaned closer, her heart racing. "Financial ledgers, or codes," she whispered. "This isn't just a diary. These notes, these are about transactions, property transfers, something more than the house itself." Caleb nodded, his skepticism tempered by intrigue. "It appears that Elizabeth discovered something, perhaps irregularities in the family's estate or inheritance. These notes are encrypted in part, but the intent is clear. She wanted to preserve evidence." He paused, glancing at Allison. "What you thought were ghosts, perhaps they were signals. Warnings. Echoes of her trying to protect something." The realization settled over Allison like a weight lifted and replaced simultaneously with something heavier. All the sounds, the doors closing, the faint crying, could be traces of Elizabeth's presence, her attempts to communicate from beyond through the remnants she left behind. But it was not supernatural. It was very human. Determined. Strategic. Allison's hands trembled slightly as she carefully opened the notebook. Diagrams of rooms, notes on property deeds, strange annotations with codes beside names. Everything suggested that Elizabeth had uncovered a criminal scheme involving the family's estate. Someone had tried to hide it, perhaps even manipulate the records to benefit themselves. Caleb leaned over her shoulder, his breath warm against her ear as he studied the pages. This is why the house seemed so sorrowful. It's the weight of injustice, not spirits. Elizabeth's story was buried with her, but these documents kept a trace. Allison exhaled slowly, absorbing the gravity of the discovery. She met Caleb's gaze, and for the first time, the barrier between their approaches, the logic and the intuition, softened. There was an unspoken acknowledgement. Together, they were stronger, a combination of careful reasoning and perceptive instinct, able to uncover truths that neither could manage alone. "Then we need to follow this," Allison said quietly, her voice firm, resolute. "Every detail, every code, every transaction. Elizabeth left this for someone to find. That someone is us." Caleb gave a faint nod, a rare gesture of agreement that carried more weight than words. Yes, he said softly. And whatever we find, we'll need to handle it carefully. The house has already shown us that history isn't always forgiving. Allison ran her fingers over the ornate key one more time, feeling its weight, its promise. The safe had yielded its first secret, and the mansion's story was beginning to unravel. In that small, dimly lit room, amid dust and fading sunlight, the partnership between intuition and logic deepened. Together, they were no longer simply archivists. They were detectives of the past, uncovering a tale of deception and courage that had waited decades to be revealed. The mansion's shadows seemed to deepen as Allison and Caleb worked late into the evening, poring over Elizabeth's notebook. Candlelight flickered against the high ceilings, casting long, distorted silhouettes along the walls. The air was thick with dust, age, and the unspoken tension that had settled between them. Every creak, every whisper of wind against the windows now seemed amplified, sharper, more insistent, as though the house itself were testing their resolve. As Allison carefully deciphered a set of cryptic symbols in the notebook, a cold draft swept through the archive, extinguishing one of the candles. The faint smell of old paper mingled with something metallic, almost tangy, that made her stomach knot. Then, from the upper floors, a low, mournful wail echoed through the corridors. Her heart leapt into her throat. "It's happening again," she whispered, her voice trembling. "The crying, it's getting worse. The ghost, it's angry." Caleb, seated at the table, scanned his notes without looking up. "Or someone doesn't want us here," he murmured, his fingers tracing lines across a ledger. "Allison, think logically. These sounds, they could be intentional, designed to intimidate, not supernatural. If there's someone following the estate's records, they might be using the mansion itself to keep us off balance." Allison's eyes darted toward the dark corners of the room, toward the ceiling beams from which shadows seemed to press down. "No," she said, shaking her head. "I know what I heard. This feels like Elizabeth. Like she's warning me. I can't ignore it." Caleb finally looked up, his eyes meeting hers with a mixture of exasperation and concern. "And I'm not saying ignore it," he said carefully. "But before you accuse a ghost, consider the possibility that the threat is human and very present. Someone with access to the mansion, someone who knows what we're doing. Elizabeth's story might have left gaps that others are desperate to keep buried." The tension hung thickly between them, compounded by the relentless flicker of candlelight and the occasional creak of floorboards overhead. Then, as if punctuating his words, a set of heavy doors slammed somewhere down the hall. Allison jumped, instinctively glancing toward the sound, her mind racing with spectral possibilities. Caleb's gaze narrowed. "See? That's not a ghost," he muttered. "That's someone using the house's own mechanics to send a message. Or to scare us off." He rifled through the remaining documents, muttering under his breath. "The more I dig, the more it becomes clear. The current owner, the grandson, is in serious debt. He's the only person with motive to sell the estate quickly. If he senses we're uncovering evidence of past irregularities, this intimidation makes sense. This isn't Elizabeth's anger. This is human desperation, masquerading as the supernatural." Allison bit her lip, torn between instinct and logic. The crying and shifting doors had felt undeniably real, undeniably tragic. But if it's just him, why go to such lengths? The noises, the drafts, they feel personal, like the house itself is mourning or protecting something. Caleb leaned back, rubbing his forehead. Because the house is protecting something. Not spirits, artifacts, documents, secrets. And he knows the value. He wants those documents gone before anyone realizes what they contain. Elizabeth's death, the irregularities in the estate, the coded notes, it's all leverage. And he's desperate. Allison exhaled slowly, her initial fear blending into a sharp, calculating resolve. "Then we need to be careful. Every noise, every anomaly, it's a warning, a challenge. But we can't let it stop us. We have to uncover the truth, whatever it takes." Caleb nodded, the faintest shadow of a smile crossing his lips. "Agreed. Intuition and logic, Allison. Yours will tell us where to look, mine will tell us how to survive. Together, we might just get to the bottom of this." As the night deepened, the house seemed to watch them, alive in its silence, pressing them forward into its secrets. Every sigh of the wind, every shifting shadow, every distant cry urged them onward. Allison and Caleb worked side by side, their partnership solidifying, their determination sharpening. The mansion's mysteries were no longer abstract. They were tangible, dangerous, and within reach, waiting for those brave enough to uncover them. The small, ornate key from the safe fit into the ancient lock of the wardrobe with a satisfying click. Dust motes danced in the afternoon sunlight as Allison turned it slowly, holding her breath. Caleb stood beside her, His usual calm focus deepened by a quiet excitement. The wardrobe creaked ominously, its weight revealing hidden hinges and mechanisms. And then, with a final reluctant groan, the back panel swung inward, revealing a narrow, shadowed corridor. Allison stepped forward, the musty scent of disuse filling her lungs. "This must be it. The source of the cries," she whispered, her voice trembling not from fear, but from a mixture of anticipation and awe. The corridor was dark, lined with peeling wallpaper and cobwebs, and at its end, a small door waited like a secret held for decades. Caleb followed closely, his hand brushing against the cold stone wall for balance. "It's remarkable," he murmured. "Whoever built this went to great lengths to conceal it. Not just a hidden room, a whole method for secrecy." Together, they pushed the door open, and the air shifted, stale, heavy, but undisturbed for decades. The room was small, lined with dust-covered shelves, boxes, and a single object that drew Allison's gaze immediately: an old phonograph, its horn coated in grime, yet somehow still commanding presence in the dim space. Caleb crouched, running a careful finger along one of the boxes. "Documents," he murmured. "Lots of them, carefully boxed and preserved. Whoever stored these didn't want them found, but they also didn't want them destroyed. They left them here, as if anticipating someone would eventually come." Allison carefully lifted the lid of the first box, revealing bundles of papers tied with faded ribbons. Names, dates, property deeds, and coded annotations stared back at her. Her pulse quickened. "Elizabeth, she didn't just die by accident, did she?" she breathed, the realization cutting through her like cold air. Caleb shook his head slowly, examining the documents. "It was an accident," he said, tone measured. But the family's response, how they concealed evidence, misrepresented her death, buried the truth, it was deliberate. They were protecting something bigger: the financial irregularities, the estate mismanagement, the schemes she had uncovered. Allison's eyes flicked to the phonograph. "And the crying, the sounds we heard?" Caleb examined it carefully, lifting the dusty cover to reveal the mechanism. This horn, it was wound and left to play intermittently. Moisture, temperature shifts, old springs, they could trigger it. That mournful sound, it wasn't a ghost. It was mechanical, but it mimicked the emotion, the sorrow. The house itself preserved her lament. A chill ran down Allison's spine, but a wave of clarity followed. Every shiver, every creak, every whisper that had unnerved her was rooted not in the supernatural, but in deliberate concealment, in layers of time and human desperation. Elizabeth's tragedy was real, but the haunting was a signal, a warning left embedded in the mansion, a final plea for truth. Caleb carefully sifted through the boxes, revealing more documents, ledgers showing fraudulent property transfers, secret agreements, and coded instructions Elizabeth had left behind. The estate, the debts, the hidden assets, someone wanted this buried permanently, he said. And these documents expose it. Elizabeth's death became the cover story, a way to avoid scandal while allowing the perpetrators to retain control. Allison set aside a bundle, her fingers trembling slightly. So all the fear, the shadows, the cries, it was guiding us here. To uncover the truth. Not to scare us, but to lead us. Caleb met her gaze, the lines of fatigue and skepticism softening. Yes, and now, it's up to us to finish what she started. To give the past a voice, to restore what was hidden and wronged. In that dusty, abandoned room, amidst boxes of secrets and the relic of a phonograph, Allison and Caleb felt a bond strengthening. A partnership forged through logic and intuition, discovery and courage. They had stepped into the mansion's hidden heart and emerged with understanding. The ghostly wails were not vengeance. They were guidance, urging them to reveal the hidden legacy of Elizabeth Blackwood. The mansion was unusually quiet that morning. Sunlight spilled through the tall, dusty windows, catching motes of dust that floated lazily in the air. Allison stood in the middle of the main hall, arms crossed, brow furrowed. The nights of whispered cries, sudden chills, and shifting shadows had left her restless. For days, she had trusted her instincts, following whispers and cold drafts, believing in the lingering presence of Elizabeth's spirit. Every shadow and sound had felt alive, purposeful. Caleb knelt beside the old phonograph in the secret room, carefully adjusting the mechanism. "Watch this," he said. With a twist of the knob, the horn slowly creaked, emitting the same mournful, quivering sound that had haunted the upper floors. Allison flinched, her pulse quickening. It sounds exactly like last night," she whispered. Caleb smiled faintly. "Exactly. That's the point." He gestured toward the phonograph. "The springs are old, sensitive to temperature and humidity. Every contraction, every moisture shift, activates it. What you heard as crying was simply physics at work, not a ghost. Allison's shoulders sagged slightly. Her eyes scanned the room, remembering the cold drafts, the shadows moving along the walls. So it wasn't real? All the fear, the sorrow. Not real in a supernatural sense, Caleb corrected gently. But your perception wasn't wrong. You felt that something was off. Your instincts brought us here to look deeper. Without them, we wouldn't have discovered the hidden room or the documents Elizabeth left behind. Still uneasy, Allison followed Caleb to the hallway where floorboards had creaked unpredictably. And the doors slamming? The furniture moving? She asked, her voice small. Caleb pointed to the warped floorboards and scratched walls. The mansion itself explains that. Timber contracts and expands. Mechanisms aren't perfectly aligned. Heavy furniture slides when the foundation shifts. Even a slight tilt can make a door swing closed on its own. Every haunting sound you noticed had a physical origin. Allison bent down, inspecting the warped boards, tracing the faint lines where centuries of movement had left marks. I guess I just interpreted it wrong. It felt intentional, alive. Caleb nodded. It felt alive because of the way you perceived it. That's the power of intuition. But intuition alone isn't proof. We needed to observe, test, confirm. She glanced at the phonograph again, the dusty horn looming like a relic. So all of it, the crying, the objects moving, the cold drafts. It was just the house reacting to itself. Yes, but remember, Allison, it was your instincts that led us here. The logical explanation doesn't diminish your perception, it validates why we investigated. Allison exhaled, a mix of relief and lingering awe. Her mind replayed the nights of eerie sounds and shifting shadows. What had once felt supernatural now made sense, yet the emotional weight remained. So, Elizabeth's story, it wasn't gone. It was hidden, just waiting for someone willing to see clearly. Caleb smiled, brushing dust from his hands. Exactly. The house isn't haunted by spirits, but by secrets and human actions. You felt something, yes, but the truth required reason to uncover. That's how we honor Elizabeth, by discovering what was concealed, not by fearing the unknown. Together, they walked back into the secret room. Allison ran her fingers along the phonograph, feeling a strange connection to the past. It guided us, she whispered, not to frighten, but to show us where to look. Caleb placed a steady hand on her shoulder. And we found it, the hidden truth. Now we know what's at stake, and we're ready for the next step. The mansion seemed quieter now, almost at peace, as if approving of their understanding. Shadows no longer loomed with menace, but with patience. And in that quiet, Allison realized, mystery and reason could coexist, intuition could guide inquiry, and logic could reveal the path. Together, they had demystified the haunting, but in doing so, they had uncovered a deeper, more dangerous human story waiting to be told. The storm that had been brewing since morning finally descended upon Blackwood Manor with the force of a long-restrained confession. Rain lashed against the tall, arched windows in relentless sheets, and thunder rolled low across the cliffs like a warning from the sea itself. Inside the manor, however, the air felt heavier, thick with the dust of unearthed truths and the weight of the past pressing forward, refusing to remain buried. Allison and Caleb worked their way back to the main study, arms overflowing with the boxes and folders they had pulled from the secret room. The hidden chamber had been suffocating, stale air, rotted wood, and the strange claustrophobic sensation of stepping directly into someone else's silenced life. Now, under the bright brass lamps of the study, those long-concealed memories sprawled across the wide mahogany table, exposed for the first time in decades. Allison set down an old cardboard box, flexing her sore fingers. I can't believe all of this was just sitting back there, like a mausoleum of lies. Caleb gently unfolded a brittle ledger, its columns barely legible. Not lies, he corrected softly. Evidence. His voice carried the quiet steel of a man who had spent his life handling the past with care. And whoever hid this knew exactly how damaging it would be. He laid out several pages side by side, financial reports, property assessments, a handful of personal letters. The ink had faded to a faint brownish hue, but the patterns were beginning to reveal themselves. Allison leaned closer, running a hand over the uneven scribbles. Names, dates, numbers, transfers, signatures. She was never supposed to be part of any of this. Was she? Her voice dropped. Elizabeth. No, Caleb shook his head slowly. She was collateral. Her death, tragic, sudden, was the perfect smoke screen. He lifted a torn envelope. Inside it was a typed memo from 1974, marked confidential. Allison watched his eyes scan the page. His eyebrows lowered. What? She asked. Look at the timing. He tapped it. The financial restructuring began 3 days after her funeral. He pulled another document. And here, this contract. It lists a forced liquidation of land parcels that had been in the family for generations. Allison felt her throat tighten. They used her death to justify the changes. They exploited it, Caleb said bluntly. Turned grief into profit. The storm outside roared louder, as if echoing the ugliness they were uncovering. For several minutes, the two worked in silence. Allison sorting, Caleb analyzing, both of them slowly mapping out the shape of the corruption. But as the pieces fit together, a new layer of unease settled over the room. Allison whispered, "The current owner. He must have known. He wouldn't be so desperate if he didn't." Caleb gave a small, grim nod. These records threaten him directly. If the truth comes out, not only does he lose the manor, he faces legal repercussions, possibly criminal charges, depending on how much he benefited. He paused, picking up a small photograph he had uncovered earlier. It showed Elizabeth, smiling softly, hair blowing in the wind near the same cliffs outside the manor. The image trembled slightly in Caleb's hand, not from fear, but from the weight of injustice. "She deserved better than this," he murmured. Allison stood beside him. "So now we make sure she gets it." Caleb breathed out, steadying himself. "Then we need to prepare a full historical reconstruction. Every document authenticated, every inconsistency highlighted." She watched as he arranged the papers into neat clusters. Financial records here, legal papers there, personal correspondence in a third pile. He handled each with a kind of reverence, like relics from a forgotten cathedral. Allison swallowed. "This will hold up in court." "Yes," he said firmly. "Once I compile everything, the case will be impossible to dismiss." A silence settled between them, but it wasn't empty. It was full of shared determination, a growing understanding that they had crossed a threshold. They were no longer just researchers in an old mansion. They were witnesses now, guardians of a truth that had waited half a century to be spoken aloud. "Caleb," Allison said softly, "what we're doing, do you think it's safe?" He looked at her, truly looked. His expression was serious but unwavering. "Maybe not, but it's necessary." A heartbeat passed. "And you won't face any of this alone." Something in her chest tightened, not in fear but in recognition, a quiet trust she hadn't expected to feel toward him, not after their rocky beginning. The manor creaked under another gust of wind, but instead of sounding ominous, it felt relieved, as if the house itself approved of the truths finally being brought into the open. Caleb began typing detailed notes, organizing evidence, outlining the structure of the final report. Allison helped cross-reference dates and highlight contradictory signatures. Hours slipped by unnoticed as the storm raged outside, but inside, for the first time, the ghosts of Blackwood Manor felt less like shadows and more like silent allies. At last, Caleb sat back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. "We have enough," he said. "More than enough. When this is finished, the owner won't be able to suppress anything." Allison leaned over the table, staring at the decades-old truth spread out before them. "Then tomorrow, we start the fight." Caleb nodded. Tomorrow. And though the wind howled and the rain pounded the walls, neither of them felt afraid anymore. They had the truth, and each other. Blackwood Manor seemed to exhale. Its long-buried secrets were no longer alone. The tension in the mansion shifted the moment the heavy front doors groaned open. Allison and Caleb shared a glance. The kind you exchange when you both know the situation has just stepped into dangerous territory. Footsteps echoed through the marble foyer, slow and confident, accompanied by the faint metallic click of an umbrella tip against stone. The owner's grandson, Nathaniel Ward, finally arrived. He wasn't old. Mid-30s, sharp suit, the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. But the unsettling part wasn't his appearance. It was the calm, almost bored expression he wore, as if he already owned the room and everyone in it. His gaze skimmed over Allison first, then landed on Caleb, and finally on the files and photos spread across the antique desk. "So," Nathaniel said, removing his gloves one finger at a time. "You've been busy." Allison didn't flinch. "We found proof of the 1972 fraud scheme. Your grandfather orchestrated it. People lost their homes because of what he did." Nathaniel chuckled softly. "Yes, and that's precisely why those documents were supposed to stay buried. Yet here you are, digging up ghosts that don't belong to you." He stepped closer. Caleb stiffened, instinctively shifting toward the stack of documents as if shielding them with his own body. Nathaniel noticed and smiled. "Relax," Nathaniel murmured. "I'm not going to touch him. I only need your cooperation." His tone shifted, suddenly sharp. "Hand over every file, every photo, every transcript you've compiled, and we will pretend none of this ever happened." Allison crossed her arms. "And if we don't?" Nathaniel's expression finally cracked. revealing the real him beneath the polite mask. Then I'll tear your careers apart. I know your editor, Allison. I know the university board that hates controversies, Caleb. I can ensure neither of you works again. Or, he added, voice lowering, I can go after your families instead. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Caleb swallowed, but Allison stepped forward before he could speak. Her voice was steady, stronger than it had been all night. You think intimidation scares me? I've interviewed cartel affiliates who were more subtle than you. Nathaniel tilted his head. I don't need subtlety. I have power. Allison took another step, positioning herself directly between Nathaniel and Caleb. Then use it, she said coldly. Because we're not giving you a single damn page. For the first time, Nathaniel hesitated. He hadn't expected resistance, especially not from her. But Allison wasn't backing down. Every inch of her posture screamed, try me. Caleb felt something shift inside him. Admiration mixed with disbelief. Up until now, he had seen her as relentless, brilliant, stubborn. But this moment showed something else entirely. She was willing to put herself at risk for him, for the truth, for the victims long forgotten. Nathaniel tried again, harsher. You don't understand what you're involving yourselves in. My family will not allow these accusations to go public. And we, Allison snapped, will not allow what your grandfather did to be forgotten. She motioned to Caleb without looking at him. Pack everything. Now. Caleb moved quickly, gathering documents, scanning pages to the encrypted drive they had prepared earlier, slipping originals into protective sleeves. His hands trembled, but his focus stayed razor-sharp. Nathaniel took a step closer, but Allison blocked him again. You really want to escalate this? He hissed. I'm already escalated, she fired back. When Caleb finished, they backed away slowly, staying together, gripping the boxes of evidence. Nathaniel stared at them with venom. You're making a mistake. When this gets ugly, and it will, remember you chose this path. Allison's reply was ice cold. Good. I prefer the honest path over the comfortable one. Then she grabbed Caleb's wrist, and together they moved toward the exit. Nathaniel didn't chase them, not physically, but his final words followed them out the mansion doors. This isn't over. Outside, in the cold night air, Caleb exhaled for the first time in minutes. Allison, you didn't have to protect me like that. She looked at him, really looked. You're the only reason we could piece any of this together. And these people, they're dangerous. You shouldn't stand alone against them. He nodded, breath shaky. So what now? Now, she said, pulling out her phone. We send everything to my editor, your university legal department, and an attorney who knows exactly how to handle men like Nathaniel. Her hands didn't shake, not even a little. And in that moment, Caleb realized something. Nathaniel wasn't the most dangerous person in this fight. The woman standing beside him was. And thank God she was on his side. Morning arrived slowly, painting the sky over the mansion in pale gold. The long night of confrontations, revelations, and danger felt strangely distant now, like the final echo of a storm that had finally exhausted itself. For the first time since they stepped onto the estate, there was silence. Not the heavy, suffocating kind that once filled its halls, but something gentler, almost peaceful. The investigation moved swiftly once Allison's editor and the attorney received the files. Within days, legal action was initiated. The victims of the 1970s scheme, especially Elizabeth's surviving family, were contacted, informed, and finally offered a chance at restitution. The case that had been buried for half a century was now open, public, and unstoppable. Nathaniel Ward's attempts to silence them failed the moment the documents reached 3 independent outlets. The truth had momentum now, and no amount of money or threats could drag it back into the dark. Caleb watched the news updates with quiet awe. I still can't believe it. Everything Elizabeth's family lost, they're finally getting justice. Allison leaned against the railing beside him. That's the thing about truth. It may take decades, but it doesn't die. It waits for people stubborn enough to drag it out again. He smiled. You mean people like you? She looked at him with a soft, knowing expression. Like us. Days later, they returned to the mansion one last time, not out of necessity, but to close the chapter properly. The change was immediate. Where the house once felt heavy, tense, almost alive with secrets, it now stood quiet and open, the way a place should be when its ghosts are finally acknowledged and laid to rest. Sunlight poured through the tall windows, warm and almost startling after so much gloom. Dust motes drifted lazily in the beams, undisturbed, peaceful. Caleb paused in the grand foyer, letting the silence settle around him. It feels different, he said. Because it is, Allison replied. Secrets twist a place. When they're released, everything breathes again. They walked together through rooms that no longer held tension. The archives where they discovered the damning evidence were now empty, cleared out by investigators. The parlor where Nathaniel had tried to intimidate them felt smaller now, like its darkness had shrunk with the truth exposed. Even the portraits on the walls looked different without the weight of lies pressing down on them. At the doorway, they paused, staring at the sunlit yard that stretched beyond the steps. The air smelled fresh, new, free. Caleb turned to her, hesitant but sincere. Allison, I've been thinking. Everything we did here, everything we figured out, together, worked because you see the story behind things. And I see the structure, the details. It's like we balance each other. Intuition and logic, she said softly. The weird combination that somehow works. That's what I'm trying to say. He took a breath. I don't want this to be the last case we work on together. Or the last anything. She stared at him, warmth blooming in her eyes. Real, unguarded, unforced. Good. Because I wasn't planning to let you vanish back into that academic cave of yours. He laughed, but the sincerity in her voice caught him off guard. She stepped closer, letting her hand brush his. You're brilliant, Caleb. And brave in ways you don't give yourself credit for. I want more of this. More of us. He swallowed, overwhelmed but steady. Me too. The moment wasn't loud or dramatic. It didn't need to be. It was honest, something rare and strong, built through tension, danger, trust, and nights spent piecing truths together by flashlight. They stepped out of the mansion together. Behind them, the once shadowed estate stood bright, washed in sunlight, no longer a vessel of someone else's crimes. Ahead of them stretched a future neither of them had expected, but both were ready for, one shaped by shared purpose, complementary strengths, and something deeper growing steadily between them. Allison looked over her shoulder one last time. No more darkness, she said quietly. Caleb nodded. Only new light. And side by side, they walked forward, partners in work, in truth, and now, unmistakably, in life. Thank you for listening to the story. Write your thoughts in the comments.